My name is Renee Richard. I'm the founder and executive director of Cinnamongirl Incorporated. I'm excited to introduce my organization to you as we begin this amazing book talk. Cinnamongirl is an organization of leaders providing girls of color with experiences and a network of influential people that help build confidence, develop her talents, and reveal her true potential to radically change the world. We are in our 17th year of teaching girls leadership development. We inspire girls to set and achieve rigorous goals, provide guidance and support as to what's needed to prepare her for college and graduate school, and expose girls to a global mindset through international travel. And finally, we have a phenomenal writing program that introduces girls to the world of literature. Our Cinnamongirls are surrounded with other ambitious youth, hands-on mentors, high-performing female leaders that encourage her to step out of her comfort zone, knowing she has the tools to take charge of her life and become a successful leader. We are together inspiring girls destined for greatness. So for more information, visit cinnamongirl.org. And with that, I introduce to you one of our fierce leaders.
Hi, I am Naomi Wilson, and I am 10 years old, and I am excited to interview these authors. To say a little bit about me, I am an entrepreneur, and I am launching my own jewelry business. I am also a book writer, and my jewelry business is going to be launched online late summer. And now I would love for the authors to introduce themselves and their book.
Okay, cool. Aimee, do you want to introduce yourself? Let's go by alphabetical order. A and Y.
So my name is Aimee Lucido. I'm the author of Emmy and the Key of Code. Emmy and the Key of Code is the story of a girl named Emmy who comes from a family of musicians. Her mom is an opera singer. Her dad plays the piano, but she feels like as much as she tries, she's not actually good at making music. So when she moves to San Francisco for her dad's job, she decides, I'm not a musician. I'm not good at it. I'm just going to be totally different. And she ends up taking a computer science class. But what she discovers is that not only does she love coding, but also that coding is kind of a musical language in and of itself. So the story is told, and it's told in verse. So if you've ever read The Crossover, it's kind of that same style. But the idea is, as Emmy learns to code, the poetry of the book starts to incorporate the language of Java, the computer language she learned. So the idea is sometimes we think we're bad at something and we leave it only to discover later on that it doesn't really leave us, and that we can't, that these sort of, this, like, you can't really be good or bad at something, because if you love it, you find it everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. It sounds wonderful. I am Yamile Saied Méndez, and I'm the author of On These Magic Shores. This is my next book that will be published. It comes out on June 9th of this year. And it's the story about three sisters, mainly the oldest sister named Minerva, who wants to be the first Latina president of the United States. She will set on this quest to change people's view of Peter Pan. Her life will also mirror a little bit of Peter Pan, because she's a child who's only 12, but she can't wait to grow up. And she, being the oldest sister in her family, hasn't had the chance to really enjoy her childhood. So in this story, instead of being this child who stays a child forever, she will have to learn how to be a kid again. And there's a little bit of magic, because she will find some help from little fairies that she doesn't want to acknowledge, but because of her little sisters, she won't have any other choice. So it's basically a story of sisters and magic and the power of story.
Thank you. I have some general questions, and I have some separate questions.
Okay.
Can you tell me how you wrote your books?
Do you want to go first, Yamile?
Okay, I'll go first. So on these magic shores, I thought of the idea about 6 years ago, and that seems like such a long time away, 2014. But basically, I've always been in love with the story of Peter Pan, and when I went back to it as an adult, I realized that there were things that were very problematic in the terms of how certain people were depicted, and it wasn't very child friendly anymore, although it's still such a love story. And this story stayed in my mind for a long, long time. On these magic shores, there's a sub story about the mom being sick, and that came about. I wrote the first draft of the book after I had the first idea after my mom passed away in 2016. And it's amazing how the original story grew into so much more than I had expected. So I wrote that first draft, and the path to publication has been super long, but I feel like now is the perfect time for the story to come out. And it didn't go on a lot of revisions with my editor. In fact, the first and the last chapter are still the original ones that I wrote, and that never happens with me and my books. I usually write the first chapter many, many times until I'm satisfied with it. But with this story, it just came out that way. The tricky part was the middle, and it was finding joy in the story, not only showing the parts of life that were super difficult for the sisters, but also showing the magic in everyday little things. And when I dug deep into the little sisters' point of view, that's when that magic came through, and I was able to let my character experience some of that magic. So that's how it happened.
So my story behind this book is I was doing a grad school program. I was getting my master's of fine arts in creative writing, and I thought that I wrote stories with magic in them. That was always what I had, in all of my books that I'd ever written before this. I was like, oh, all my books have to have magic. Mm-hmm. And so I was reading, Andrea Davis Pinkney has a book called The Red Pencil, which is a beautiful book. It has nothing to do with computer science. And yet, when I was reading it, all I could think about was computer code. So I'm a software engineer in addition to being a writer. I'm no longer working in tech, but I did for about 6 years. I was working as an app developer. And in my entire life, I had always had these sort of two very separate worlds. I had my world of writing, which was very literary and, it was creative. And then I had my computer science world, which in my head was the total opposite. But to me, they never really seemed like opposites, but everyone kind of saw them as opposites. But when I was reading this book, all I could think about was how the poetry of the Red Pencil reminded me of the coding language Python. And I don't know if either of you have ever coded in Python before, or anybody watching has, but one thing that coding languages do is they assign meaning, very literal meanings, to certain punctuation, to certain like tabs and spaces and new lines. And I realized that poetry and code are actually really similar in some ways. And both poetry and code, they're both things that people can be kind of intimidated by, and they're both things that can be sort of mysterious, and that people in schools are like, oh, I can't read poetry, or like, oh, I can't code. But both of them are just English. They're just words. People don't always realize that with code. Is that if you understand how to read code, it just reads like English. And so I had this idea to show a girl learning how to code through the language of poetry. And if I could teach code like music, if I could teach it like poetry, then I could show people that it's not scary, and also that there's kind of this little bit of like magic to code. So I realized that it wasn't actually abandoning magic, even though it's totally a contemporary story. It's my, but that was sort of my entryway into it. And the first draft happened really fast because for the first time I was writing up something I was an expert in, because I've been coding, for a decade. And the first draft flowed easily. It's changed so much since that very first draft. But there are some poems that are more or less the original. And that's very fun to go back and see how much it's evolved since then.
That's fantastic. It's funny that you say that because I'm usually a contemporary author. In fact, everything else that I've written is like straight contemporary, but this one that has magic. So
Yeah,
it's funny how it happens sometimes.
it really is. And my second one's straight contemporary also. I'm now finally going back to something with like a tiny bit of magic in it, but it's sort of like, is this even really magic? You don't really know.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's very interesting how I like magical stories. And with that, what inspired you to write your books?
I can start for this one. So like I said, I was a software engineer up until about a year ago. I was working as a software engineer. And whenever people heard, or whenever I told people that I was also a writer, I would get these looks like, oh my gosh, they're so different. They're such opposites. And I see why people think that, because people think of computer science as so mathy, even though it's not really. I very rarely use math in computer science. It's very, to me, it's always felt like communicating a thought. It's like if I can conceptualize an idea, then it's the coding, the communication is actually really easy. It's first coming up with the idea that's hard. And actually writing is very similar. It's like first you have to know what you want to say, then you have to figure out how to say it. And the figuring out how to say it has never been the hard part of writing. It's always the figuring out what you want to say. That's the hard part. And so they've always actually been really similar to me. And so what inspired this particular book was sort of the desire to show how similar they are. I've always been someone who's interested in a lot of different things. I pick up hobbies really quickly, and then I'll do them for a year and then I'll drop them, or I won't. And there's some, I make crossword puzzles. That's another sort of hobby thing of mine. And I've been doing that for 10 years, and that's like a job for me now. And I've never sort of dropped that. But I think one of the things that sort of connects all the stories I ever work on, that I'm ever interested in, is sort of finding connections between things that people don't necessarily think as related. And so this story was very much like me trying to show people that like code doesn't have to be this like mathy, robotic, soulless thing. It can be beautiful. It can be artistic. Like you can use code to do anything. You can use it to tell a story. You can use it to make art. You can use it to like create robots and like carry out tasks. You can use it in the field of medicine. You can use it in the field of history. We think of like the classes that we take in school as being these silos, like English class, history class, math class, and how they're all different. But in the real world, everything like jumbles together. And I kind of wanted to show that.
Yes, I love how you say that, because I feel that's the same for me. For my bachelor's degree, I studied economics, international economics. And a lot of people, when they hear that, they always ask the same question: how did you go from economics to writing? But in my mind, they're so connected, because economics is just the story behind the markets and why people do the things they do. And that's always something that I've been fascinated. It's just people. I'm an introvert, but I'm a social introvert, and I love being around people and watching them and understanding why we do the things we do. And as a child, I was always observing everything around me. So my inspiration for my stories is always a question that I've kept in my heart since I was a child, maybe your age, Naomi, or even younger, or some questions that my children have come up to me with, and I didn't know the answer then, and then I've been thinking about. I have a picture book that's called "Where Are You From?" And that one was born of a question that we, in our family, we hear pretty much every day. Not so much now that we haven't been outside the house, but you will be surprised that even when we get, like the random delivery, the person will still ask, "Where are you from?" And I know that's a way for people to establish a conversation or a connection. But that's something that had been in particularly my son's mind for a while. And so that's how that particular story was born. So sometimes a story can be born of a random thought or a newspaper headline, or sometimes when I'm listening to a song. I read once an interview that was done on one of my favorite music groups. And the singer and composer said that sometimes he was inspired by the books he reads. And I thought how interesting it is, how everything is connected and art feeds from other art, because how many times have I been inspired by music that I hear?
Yeah.
So
really,
that's how stories are born.
Wow. That's nice. How did you pick the titles for your books?
Mine is super easy because On These Magic Shores is actually a phrase that you can find in Peter Pan. And it's now the epilogue of the book, and I can read it for you. It says, on these magic shores, children at play are forever beating their coracles. We too have been there. We can still hear the sound of the surf, though we shall land no more. And J.M. Barrie was nostalgic about childhood when he said this, that when we are grown-ups, we can look back on those magic shores of childhood, but we can never return. Although I will argue that as a writer, we can return over and over again when you, of course, you can't return in a physical way unless you have a travel machine. But those feelings that stayed with you as a child, you can revisit them and explore them later. So that's where this particular title came from.
I love that. That's beautiful. It's a great title.
Thank you. I was lucky I got to keep it.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask if that was the original title too, because my title changed a little bit. Not too much, but it almost changed a lot. And I was reading a friend of mine's book, just changed titles completely, and he had an article. Yes. Like a blog post about how titles change. And it's just interesting because we often don't think about it when we're just reading a book. But titles or books in general are, they're such a team effort. There's so many hands that go into a book. But I think sometimes, you see the author's name, you're like, this is 100% the author's book. And it's kind of true, but it's not true at all.
Exactly.
And so my book, the original title was called The Music My Keyboard Makes, which I thought was so cool because, we think of keyboard as like a computer keyboard or like a piano keyboard. Yes. But I still like that title. I
love it.
I think it's really cool. It's not really a middle grade title. It's not something that would necessarily draw in a kid. And so I had a bunch of conversations with friends to try to change it because it's a little bit clunky. And so someone had suggested the idea of calling it like Songs in the Key of Code, because kind of an homage to the Stevie Wonder album, Songs in the Key of Life. And so it was Songs in the Key of Code for a while.
What kinds of things do you wish you would have added to your book that you didn't?
I'm now in the very final stages of one book. It's a YA that will come out in the fall, and it's just a final read through. And I've had to contain myself into not changing anything, but the minimal punctuation or typos, because that story is already told and then it belongs to my readers. On These Magic Shores, I will not add it, but some people that have read advanced copies of it, they ask me how the mom is doing now in the story. And I love that kind of question because I did not want to provide a final answer for the reader. But I want them to keep wondering about my characters long after they're done reading. So instead of making me want to go back and change that ending, I had a little satisfaction, and it's that evilness of the writer.
I get the same question about my ending. So I'm into it. I like when people ask what happened.
Yes, exactly. And then they can write their own fan fiction or, think about the characters. And they can choose their own ending.
Will there be a second part of either books?
I don't plan on writing one. Never say never. If the reaction to Emmy was so huge that everyone was demanding a sequel, then I would definitely consider it. But as far as I'm concerned right now, Emmy's story has been told. But of course, never say never. I do have a second book coming out next year. It was supposed to be out in the spring. I think it's being moved to fall because of everything that's going on. And I think of it as it's in no way a sequel. It's a totally different family. It's like, it's not similar at all, but I think of it as a companion novel because I think the themes are similar, and I think it plays with format in kind of a similar way, even though my second book is much more straight prose. There's like a poetic element. So I think of the books as being in conversation, and I have like a third book in my head that's sort of also in conversation with those two, but they're all completely independent books.
Perfect. Yes, same thing with On These Magic Shores. Never say never, like Aimee said, but in my mind, the story is already done. And also, my other middle grades, they are part of the same universe, although they're not sequels. They all take part in the same little town, and they just exist in this parallel universe. And it's been fun to explore different facets of their community, of my characters' community, through different stories, but they're not necessarily sequels to each other.
How long did it take you to write the books? I mean, it only took me one day.
Lucky. Some books take me a long time. I told you that I have a YA coming out in the fall. That I started writing that book in early 2005, 2006. And so it's been a long, long journey. On These Magic Shores, I started writing it a long time ago in my mind, at least. But some other books don't take me that long. But I always say that the work and the education that I got as a writer made it possible for me to write sometimes a book in less than a year.
Yeah.
That it depends on the story.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's two parts of writing the book. There's writing the book, and then there's becoming the person who is able to write the book. Mm-hmm. And so Emmy it took a year to get it to the point where I felt comfortable sharing it with like people in the industry. Like, it was the book I got my agent with. So it took a year to get my agent with it. We sold it pretty quickly, but then it was under revision for another year, kind of all things considered, even though it was actually, we were revising right up until the end because the formatting is so weird. It took a long time to get the formatting right. And so we had 12 rounds actually of revision of just the formatting. I know it was, and it's just because of how tricky the formatting is because it combines code and poetry, and just like the way that code is formatted is so specific. And so after we had copy edits, we had 12 rounds of formatting, and we had to keep bringing the copy editor in. It was a really challenging.
That's intense.
Yeah, it's super not typical for that to happen, but with this one, it was necessary. But that was actually a pretty fast process. It was about 3 years from the first draft to the final, when it came out. But every project is so different. I wrote 16 books before this, I got one published. And I say book kind of liberally, like some of them were fully complete and like revise. And some were picture books that I wrote once and was like, I'm never going to touch it. But it was 16 total stories.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a project now that I started drafting when I graduated college, which was in 2013. So it's been 7 years that I've just been like revising this thing just on and off. And I really love it. I think it's I keep going back to it. There's something I'm trying to get at there. And I hope this is the time, but who knows? Maybe it'll get published 10 years from now. Maybe it'll never get published.
Yes.
So some things take forever and some things just like happen like a flash.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say like 3 years from first draft to final publication is like probably about as low as you can get unless you're like someone super famous who has like a publishing house like at your beck and call. Like there are some people who publish things who have so many people on their team that they can
one a year. Yes.
Yeah, one a year. 3 years is like probably about average because there's this concept called lead time, where after you announce a book, you want there to be a little bit of a buildup. You want there to be a cover reveal, and you want there to be like early copies in the world for about 6 months to get reviews, to get people excited. And so like the fastest a book, and it takes time to draft and revise a book. And so 3 years is about as fast as it gets, unless you have like a major following and you like need to get a book out tomorrow because the
fans are demanding it.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting. I like it.
It's a labor of love. Because I always think, like there's this misconception that sometimes people have that authors are millionaires, but I always think, if I had to be compensated by the hour, it'd be cents an hour. Because you spend sometimes years on different books. It's just a labor of love and the story that you're compelled to tell.
Absolutely.
How many books do you want to write?
As many as they'll let me.
I want to write forever and ever. I imagine myself years and years from now as a little old lady still chipping away on my books.
Yeah, I have this book that's out. I have 2 more on the way that are like under contract that are, slated to eventually come out someday. We're trying to publish a couple more right now. I'm drafting 3 different books right now simultaneously. And then not simultaneously, but like that are in various stages of draft. Yes. And I have probably like 4 ideas in a little idea book where I'm like, one day I'm going to write that book. And and I'm only like a year into my career, not even.
Yes, it's exciting how it happens sometimes. And the idea, and that's the magic of writing, that the more ideas you have, the more ideas you get. So
sometimes I'm just writing and you'll have an idea in the book. You're like, oh, I want to get this into the book. And then it doesn't belong. You're like, I have to write that book later.
For sure.
Aimee, you left us hanging. Is the teacher going to be okay?
I love that question. I love getting asked that question because I don't really have an answer. I have like what I believe, but that doesn't matter. I think what matters is what the reader believes and what the reader takes into it. I will tell you sort of why I chose to do that. I have a bunch of reasons why, and I kind of choose a different one every time I talk about it. But the reason that I think feels the most authentic is that the story is, it's sort of about Emmy realizing that things are not as binary as she once thought, that there's sort of this middle ground between being this or that. And actually something that I talk about when I speak at schools is this notion of the word or, and how in English, when we say or, we usually mean like one or the other, but not both. Like if your family asks what you want for dinner and they say, do you want pizza or hamburgers? And you can't say both. You can't say yes, like I do want pizza or hamburger. You can't say that. But in computer science, the word or actually includes and by default. And if you wanted to not include it, you have to like specify that. Like by default, or means and also, which is really cool because I think when we're talking about, I think there's sort of this, like I think when we're 12, 13, that's when we're sort of starting to realize that not everything is this or that you can be 2 things, that you can be a software engineer and a musician, that people can be good and bad, that friends can both love us and also maybe do something that's not that nice. And sort of learning to deal with that gray area is sort of what part of growing up is about. And sort of pairing that with the concept of computer science and things that are where it's literally binary. Computers are built on ones and zeros, but how real life isn't as simple as that. That was sort of why I chose to leave that ambiguous, because Emmy's learning to be okay with things being ambiguous, and she has to sort of, and she hopes she's optimistic in the end. Like she thinks that her teacher's going to get better. But ultimately she has to learn to be happy. She has to learn to still trust that she's going to find her way either way.
I really enjoyed Emmy and the Key of Code. Are any of the characters someone you know?
I think every character in every book that you write is sort of a hodgepodge of people in your life. I think it's really hard to make someone just completely like somebody you know. Although my sister does like to make fun of me of how similar Emmy is to Aimee, which is my name. I did that totally by accident because I didn't think of the sound of the name. I thought of how they look, and they look very different because I spell my name Aimee, and Emmy is Emmy. So they look totally different. And I didn't hear it aloud until I put the word Emmy in my title. Until I had to say it over and over again. And I was like, oh, wow, it sounds like my name. But that was an accident. But Emmy, there's aspects of her that are like me. Like I was the new kid in 4th grade in Chicago. So I sort of did the opposite direction of Emmy. And so there's a lot of aspects of me that go into her, but I think there's also a lot of aspects of me that went into Miss Delaney. She sort of has a bit of my career trajectory where she was in tech for a while, decided that she needed something else and decided to teach, whereas I decided to go write. I think some of the kids in the computer science class are based on friends that I had or people that were in my computer science class. My teacher, the teacher who actually taught me to code, his name was Baker Frankie, and I named Miss Delaney's first name. Her first name is Frankie. I named her after him because there's a little bit of him and her also. So all the characters are like kind of a mashup.
Yamile, Minnie wants to become president. What would Minnie want girls to know about dreaming big?
Well, daydreaming is what keeps her going, and she's a Latina girl, and she lives with her mom, who's a single parent, and her two little sisters. And Minnie has so many responsibilities on her shoulders, some that were put on her shoulders by default of being an oldest child, and some that she takes on trying to protect everybody around her. So for her, daydreaming is her escape. And the fact that she, a Latina girl in this suburban town, can think that she can fix the problems of the whole country just shows you what kind of person she is. So she's just a fixer. And that you will see at the end of the book, she will realize that nobody can do everything on their own, that they always need help. So I think that's something that she will tell girls her own age, that it's beautiful to daydream and have these goals and work hard for them, but it's also a good idea to remember that nobody can do it all on their own. That you're either following on somebody's footsteps that pave the way for you to achieve your goals, or that along the way you're going to need a lot of helping hands.
This is a stone that I made for Emmy in the Key of Code. Here's the back. And then there's the writing on that side.
Oh, I love that. That is so neat. That made my week.
We have had a wonderful time, and I would encourage people to read Emmy and the Key of Code and On These Magic Shores. Thank you for the opportunity you have gave me.
Oh, thank you. You were wonderful, and I hope to read one of your books one day and be in a panel with you.
That's right. Thank you so much for having us. This was so fun.
This was awesome. And it was so great to meet you virtually, Amy, and I hope we can cross paths.
You too.
One day.
I can't wait to read your book. You said it comes out June 9th, you said?
June 9th, yes.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
It will
Thank
be
you so
online.
Perfect.
Yes.
It sounds great. I'm really excited for it.